Archaeodeath with Professor Howard Williams, bringing the past to life, just in time for its own funeral.
Oh,
Will not. Hey, I thought it wasn't going to work, mate. How are you?
yeah, it wasn't working because I think you did the you pre-planned the live and you did an invite, and
Oh,
I went live, and then I couldn't join you. So I'm figuring out this technology
this
day
is how
by day.
wars start. This is how wars begin. Because someone goes, I invited him here, and he was over on that live, and I was on that live, and then hello, lovely to see you. Do you want me to?
Yeah,
Do you want
yeah.
to do it a different way? Do you want me to? Do you want me to do it a different fashion, or should I go out and join yours?
I
Would you prefer that?
no. I'm here now, so
Hey,
we'll do it here,
okay.
and. I hope that both of us will get the live archives in our archives. Otherwise, I will have to get you to download them and send them to me.
Well, I
But
can.
we'll,
I'm happy to do that. I'm happy to do that. Yeah.
yeah,
I'm
excellent.
how are you?
I'm surviving. And I mean, I really hate what you've done to me, because I thought I'm going to draw Archaeodeath. It'll just be
I
a
know.
bunch of curls
I
and some
know.
glasses, and then you went and
You'll have to. You'll have
that's
to add them in. Please
I
add
mean,
creative additional curls, because yes, I'm sorry about that. I've left it so long. I thought it's either going to just go on and on and on, or for the summer I do a lot of cycling, you see, and when I have my helmet on, it feels just getting. So I thought. So,
I completely understand. I forgive you. I'm in a
oh,
forgiving mood.
thank you.
I'll just
Thank you.
charge double.
For less charge double for less hair.
Yeah, yeah, that's how we roll. So basically, uh, what I'm doing on these lives where I do the portrait is I have your photos here on my screen, and I will be looking a little bit at you and a little bit about
Yeah,
on your photos, and I'll be trying to capture something. And whenever I draw someone, I always try to express their beauty. So if
good luck.
if it ends, yeah, no, but seriously, if it ends up not looking like you, it is my bad.
No, I'm sure it's.
And if it ends up looking like you, like your beautiful self, then it is your honor. Then it's your doing. So yeah. And you're the boss here, so I'll just uh, ask you questions, and we'll take it from there. First question
Absolutely.
is: I have a bunch of colors, and I thought I'd start with a random ink blot. So, which color do you want?
Oh,
You have to choose one.
oh, a green or a blue? I don't know.
A green or a blue. So
Give you
let us
options.
see. I
I was looking at
think
myself and
I
saying,
think this blue here
oh, that
seems pretty cool.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah. So we'll
Impression
start
choice.
with that,
I feel
and
nervous.
that I feel nervous because uh, portraits usually shouldn't be done on a live stream, and also portraits usually take more than an hour, and I'm trying to do each of these in 1 hour. So
Wow.
yeah,
Okay. Well, I must admit, you were talking in your videos recently about the agency that we attribute to other things and being our fault. And I go through the world,
yeah,
probably
yeah,
like
yeah.
most people, thinking that, even though I'm not a very superstitious or spiritual person at all, I still think like when I went to the hairdressers, I thought somehow the way I might sit might change the work of the person cutting my hair. And my brain's going, what am I talking to myself about? Or the rain, as you say with rain. It's a classic example all the time. I go, yeah, it's definitely raining, and I did that because, and I go, what? Stop it. The other part of my brain's going, don't be silly. So, I'm nervous here because somehow I'm not involved, but I equally somehow feel that the way
This is the start.
That's it. You finished now. You've captured it. That's it.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you all for watching. Goodbye. Okay. So I think I'll take that train of thought. How we perceive the world as somehow alive.
Yeah.
And that also ties into how we perceive our loved ones as alive when they no longer are alive. Absolutely. That's why people go and visit the graves of their loved ones and sometimes even talk with them. And that ties in to earlier ideas of altars for their loved ones, or these grave mounds and all of that. So it's just a very big and difficult question to start with. How do you think perception of death and how we connect with those who have died has shifted from the period you're studying, which is the medieval English or British period, and to today?
I think it's a.
Can you say anything about the grand change?
Very big question, isn't it? And I suppose as an archaeologist, we can't get inside the minds of past people, and we're working with fragments of evidence, but we have to try. We have to try to. We are studying alien societies. We're studying alien cultures, and our challenge is always to remember these are people just like us with the same concerns, egos, fears, dreads, diseases, not liking our neighbours, not liking our kids or our grandparents. All those type of things that make us human are not that much different from people who lived in, say, the early Middle Ages, the early medieval Wales, Viking Age, Norway, wherever it may be. And so at one level, when we're doing our study, we've got to remember that actually our attitudes to death are not that different. Our attitudes to life are not that different. There are commonalities. And yet equally, our job is to look at change, to try and explain we are going to a different time, a different way of thinking about the world. And so our challenge with the Viking Age, for example, the sort of late 8th to 11th centuries in Northern Europe, in areas where we could talk about Vikings, or areas where we wouldn't really use that term. But the point is, we're dealing with societies that are so similar to us, in many ways, slightly different languages, slightly, very different lifestyles. But equally, we've got to remember we're dealing with a different society. You would know most of the people that lived and died around you. You would, of course, travel at times to assemblies or to towns, early towns. You'd have a broader network, and you will have stories brought to you of people that have gone long distance. But most people were living, and they would see people born, they would see people die on a yearly basis, on the regular. And I think one of the big differences, I think, between us and them, having made the point that there is a lot of similarities, that it's not a completely alien world, but one of the key differences is that regular, repeated engagements with the materials of death, the corporality of death, the smells of death, the sounds of death, the obligations to treat the dead, to honor people you don't like as much as you might honor the people that you really loved. And I think that is the challenge of us as archaeologists, to remind people that, we're dealing with this. You can't sort of go, in the Viking Age, people thought this because Snorri Sturluson said this, or a saga mentioned this. And we've got to realise that there were probably dozens and dozens of different ideas about what is death, what happens to the dead, circulating in any one region of Northern Europe, in that period. and let alone the fact people are converting to Christianity. And that meant very different things to different people too. And you probably asked two completely avowed convert Christians in the 11th century, even in the same area of Sweden, and they'd probably have completely different understandings of what it actually meant to them, in the same way as you talk to people today. So I suppose I'm not answering your question, but I'm trying to get the point is that one of our big challenges as historians of death, as archaeologists of death, is to say there are some commonalities. You know, there's bodies to be dealt with. You have to do something with this body, but it's that tangibility that we don't have in our society, where death is in hospitals mostly, or if it is at home, rapidly the body becomes something that is taken out of our sight. Is not, we don't wash, we don't dress the dead, we don't carry the dead, we don't burn the dead ourselves. We have professionals that do it, and so we are, like so much of our society, there is a sense of detachment. I think, and I think that is one of the big differences, is that in the early Middle Ages, death was regular, it was experienced, and you may have had very different ideas of what it means, and but it would have been something you had to deal with. And as you say, when you bury the dead, cremate the dead and put them in a burial mound or whatever you do, the dead would be a part of that family, that kinship group, that community. The dead aren't going away. They're still in the world, I suppose. And I think if I can keep ranting, if that's okay, I don't, because I know you're busy, but one of the things that I found, one of the wonderful things about our popular TV show representations of, say the Vikings, is that we get a sense of because they did consult with historians over the TV show Vikings and the Northman film. They've taken on board what archaeologists like Neil Price and others have argued, that death was a theatre. It was elaborate ritual. It was involved sacrifice of animals. It involved blood. It involved spectacle, fire. They've got all that, but what they forget often is that the dead don't go away. They don't go, farewell, there he goes off onto the fjord in a burning ship, because in many of the societies that we're encountering, the dead stay. And as you say, the burial mound or the grave is a place where you go back and you talk to the dead. You may actually commune with the dead, and I think that's something that is shared in many cultures around the world. It's not something unique to early medieval societies, but I think that's something that we forget in our popular culture. Maybe you'll have like a personalized little conversation, with a kind of spirit world character, at one point in the show, but there's no sense that, that when you're at the funeral, the dead are not simply just a corpse. They are still that person, and they are still part of what's going on. They are the chief personality of what's going on. And I think in our funerals, we perhaps forget that, in a sense, that because the corpse is out of sight, it's in a coffin. And I think that's really one of the things that really drives me mad about these TV show representations of funerals is, yes, they got a sense that, they were doing crazy things back then. They were pre-Christian, they were traditional religious beliefs, but the TV show versions kind of forget that the dead stay in the landscape. Although, to be fair I think they almost were reading my blog posts as they were going, because by seasons 5 and 6, they did get better in the TV show Vikings, and the Last Kingdom did try with a few graves. So the grave of Ragnar in the Last Kingdom, the sort of a foster brother of Uhtred, son of Uhtred. You go back to his grave and see his grave. So I think they were aware of this problem, that they took on board this idea, from the 1958 film that firing arrows into a ship and then bye-bye, there's nothing there. But I think the landscape is full of the dead, I think, is one of the things that we must remember. And that's true of the Scandinavian landscape to this day. And I think that's one of the things that these shows are made by Brits and Americans. And we, in Britain, we've still got many ancient monuments, but because of the intensity of the agricultural revolution in Britain and then the Industrial Revolution, antiquarians and early archaeologists were digging into burial mounds in the late 18th and 19th century at the time that most of them were literally being levelled by farmers and industrialists, for making railways and for making roads and for improving farmland, draining fens. We were destroying all our ancient monuments in a way which, because industrialization took place differently in parts of Norway and Sweden and Denmark. There's the physical presence of the dead is still very much in the landscapes of Scandinavia in a way we don't have. Well, in some areas we have, but not that level. So I think, when people go around and people say to me, where do I go and see some of these early medieval burial mounds, Howard, that you're talking about from Britain? And I have to say, there's probably only a handful of places where you can literally get out and look and see an early medieval burial mound in Britain. And I can conclusively tell you, this is an early medieval burial mound. Whereas in parts of Sweden I visited and parts of Norway, you can go farm to farm and you can say, well, this is a medieval farm. There's the rune stones that were probably the Christianized Viking Age peoples were raising. And look, there's the Iron Age graveyard, there's the Iron Age cemetery, and there's another one down the road. So you really get a sense of that landscape where the dead are still a part of the living space, whereas we've kind of lost that in Britain. So I think that may be part of the issue. But yeah, so physicality and the presence of the dead in the landscape, that's my answer. But I babbled on.
So I've just gone and done something unprecedented, because a combination of two factors. One, the drawing wasn't quite going how I was hoping it would. And two, I had forgotten to start recording the drawing. So I have tossed the drawing and made a new, completely different inkblot. And this will be much better.
It's your boss. You make the rules.
I make the rules. I break the rules. That's how we roll.
Exactly.
One thing I kept thinking about was that to my kids, I remember the first time they went out fishing and saw a fish being gutted and killed. And that was kind of like, ooh, they had never seen anything like that.
Yeah.
And I also am thinking about my own experiences with, luckily, very few friends and family who have died, but they are, from the moment they died, they are just suddenly vanished. They just poof, disappear, and you never see them again, except in photos. But the whole, at least in Norwegian, I don't know how it was in Norwegian Viking Age culture, but in Norwegian later farming culture, the body would be taken into the house, it would be washed, it would be kept there for many days and taken care of, and it would give all the family and friends from a big area the time to come and see the dead and also talk to the dead. So do you think that could be sort of one of the reasons why we today feel a huge unreality to death often,
Yeah.
while the dead was very much seemed to be much more real to...
Yeah, I think most academics, right, dealing with death, there's a different... I've dealt with people across disciplines dealing with death and death rituals, and I'm perhaps more keen than most not to try and recommend one way to die, one way to, not to die, but to deal with the dead, is that there's a lot of rhetoric about...
That's the next question is, what are your top 5 ways to die? So it's
Okay, I'll get onto that. I'll start thinking. So I would certainly say that I'm not trying to say everything's bad about the modern world. There's many benefits to that distance, and we have created our own set of ways of working with that distance of death and not have. And in the past, I think death was always given over to someone else. It was never, there was always older people, neighbours, maybe, particularly the gendered nature of death, women who in specific roles who would be, doing the work of the dead. But I think there was always going to be, but I think in many ways, when we talk about this fundamental change in humanity with, say, Christianization, or where depending on which religion it is, which part of the world, but major world religions. I know everyone doesn't like to use the term world religion anymore, but big monotheistic faith would change the way people dealt with the dead. I don't think they did. I think the real change is industrialization. So we are only a few generations away from societies that dealt with the dead in a way that in many ways was very similar to the Viking Age or other parts of the early Middle Ages. So I mean, I've attended a funeral of in a Welsh tradition where the body, yes, it's fully, the undertaker's involved, but the body is brought and it's overnight in a parlour, and people go into the front room and pray for the dead, and then it's taken out and taken to the grave. So there's a public specialized stage, and in the meantime it had been in a morgue, so it had been frozen, as most of, well, frozen, but chilled, kept on ice, so that we can organize the funerals longer, so it's a less smelly process, but still that tradition of bringing it into the house and put overnight in the front room, it's something that's it's almost within our memories of older people today. And and so while I think this is the biggest change in the way we deal with the dead, is that the death is not necessarily, not everyone dies in the home, but people are brought back into the home, as you say, and that is something that is must go back to the first farming societies, if not before. So I think we do have to, again, it's that balance. I'm not trying to say everyone's the same and death is experienced the same way, but it's about being aware of those that we, only recently did we start doing things differently, So yeah, I think people do have trouble with this, and that, I'm not saying it's healthier. I don't want to go down this route saying it's healthier to, force people to encounter corpses, but I am saying it would have been something that would have been, until very recently, a common experience.
Are you trying to say that Ibn Fadlan's description of sending the slave girls to die with the ones being buried isn't healthy?
I wouldn't recommend it in my Dr. Howard Williams book on how to die like a Viking, which will be in all good bookshops next week. No.
Yeah.
First, find a slave girl. No. We're going down that route. No, I mean, obviously,
don't.
And that was obviously shocking to Ibn Fadlan, and and was seen as something unusual, and was probably very unusual in Viking period society, anyway. But it was, But what's really interesting about that may have been exceptional, but what is really interesting about her role in the funeral is she's a witness of paradise. She is supposed to see into, Ibn Fadlan calls it paradise, but she saw into Valhalla, or whatever version of the afterlife was the Rus were imagining. She is like a performer herself, and who is connecting worlds through her visions that she is seeing. So, and I think that's one of the things that we, perhaps in our modern rational world, we like to imagine there is a place elsewhere where the dead go, but even in that account, with all the biases and problems with it, we're being given a vision where someone is there saying, I can see where they're going to be. I am literally where they're going is here, and it's not in some distant, far off. When we see 19th century drawings of the Norse mythology and cosmology with all these different planes of existence elsewhere, her vision is, I am seeing this. I am able to look onto it. We don't know what that means. We don't know whether she is seeing into some, like down a telescope into some distant place, or she is literally imagining there is a world that overlaps with ours where the dead are. It's really interesting because we make lots of assumptions about that, but we don't really know. And I think that when we look at these, say, the Icelandic family sagas, and they do talk about sacred hills and the landscape being around their farm, having the dead inhabited and burial mounds, and then I think we have to imagine people in the past were not abstracting these mythologies into little drawings like a 19th century saga translator would do, and a historian or historian of religion would do. They're thinking about their landscape, the landscape they're used to, they're familiar with. And there are some places where that other world is close, is almost touchable, or certain moments, where they feel they can touch that other world. And I think that's really, brings home to us when we think about archaeological finds and actual places, just how these past societies in the Viking Age and else other times as well, the where the dead went wasn't far away. It was just literally just over the horizon, maybe, or just into that hill over there, or just down the river, and they're thinking of it in very geographical terms around their local landscape, I feel.
I did a live drawing fable, another TikTok
Yes,
creator, Barbro. Yes, on Friday, and one of the things I mentioned to her in terms of the folklore and the folk belief is that one way that I try to look at it as a very skeptical person. I have my own spirituality, but it's very, I still live in a very scientific, mechanistic universe in a sense. But one way I look at it is sometimes my wife will dream that I do something mean towards her, and she will wake up and she will be mad at me, and she knows that it happened in a dream, but the feeling is still real.
yeah.
And this is sort of an example of how even in a modern mechanistic world we can have two realities at the same time, and that this also seems to be able to go into the landscape, that they're dealing with a mythical and physical landscape that takes up the same space and are real in different ways. Sort of. That's my theory, at least. I don't think it's my theory. I probably stole it from someone.
Yeah, and well, we're all stealing ideas and taking on different ideas. And there's a good example of that. I won't name names, but there's a recent publication by a Norwegian archaeologist that has a very good argument and examples of what we've just been talking about. And I went, hey, this is really familiar. And I look back to one of my older articles and went, oh, I've said exactly the same thing. And it's not that they stole the ideas off me. It's just that they were using different examples and coming to the same conclusion with different evidence, and it was a good thing, because I thought, I didn't go, huh, that's my idea, because these ideas are out there and people have talked about them for different kinds of archaeological and historical data. And I'm not saying that sagas are a window onto the Viking Age and everywhere, but I'm just saying that when you go to any individual part of the landscape of Northern Europe and you find the archaeological evidence of where people are living, where they were burying the dead, you can start to work out their local worldviews, their local experience of sacred places, of the dead, and perhaps they made very localized stories about their landscape, and those changed over time. Yeah, it's a bit. Someone said in the comments here, a bit very Jungian. I think. Well, I don't want to create into this kind of and trans-temporal sense of landscape, but I'm saying that people practically work with the environment they're in. They adapt it, and yes, these overlap, as you say, between the stories and the memories and the other potential places and realms and worlds that they encounter, I think were perhaps very real to people.
Just a side comment that I think I know why artists like myself are so fascinated with sort of bad scientists like Jung or Campbell, or in the modern manosphere, Jordan Peterson, is because they have theories that can only be proven by their own logic. So they are actually they are allowing themselves to sort of pluck truth out of their own ass which is exactly the way artist works, and which is also valid for art, but not so much for academia. But I still like my Jung, so
But
because it's valid for storytelling.
It's not about discrediting just because they are, they're still fun ideas to be played with. I think we just all have a responsibility of who picks up these ideas. It's like, if I'm at a particular small academic conference with 5 people in the room and someone says something and there's a conversation about, is that right? Is that right? But when you put something out and then suddenly it's a TikTok that goes viral, or it's for a TV show, and you suddenly realize that, yeah, I said that and it's all my fault, and now everyone's saying, I saw this guy who said this, and you go, oh no, what have I done? What monster have I created? And I suppose that's the problem with anything we say about the historical or archaeological past, isn't it? Is that, audience matters, and, some of these things you just go, yeah, I did say that, but I didn't mean it to come out that way. And I think that's what we're having a lot of problems with at the moment in archaeology, is people with some very cool ideas, and sometimes they're pushing it too far, or in the publication they did all the war, not so sure, but people are running with it, and before you know it, down the line, it's the Anglo-Saxons did this, or all the Vikings thought this, and you go, whoa, it was a fun idea, but now I see it being used by thousands of creators to suggest something quite dodgy. It suddenly becomes a problem. I haven't had that experience myself, but I have seen my academic articles cited in very dubious places, and of course I haven't understood them, and they've used them in a completely horrible way. But it happens to all of us if you write something or say something about the past. So yeah, I find it's a difficult one, isn't it? Where does the responsibility stop? I suppose with an artist you can say, I drew this dragon. If someone then says that's the way dragons were, is that your fault because it's just such a cool dragon? I suppose obviously not, but but then equally, with academic work, sometimes you find things quoted back at you, and you go, well, that's kind of oh god, did I say that? And now it's being used in this way. It's a tough one, isn't it?
Yeah, but I think for art there is a sort of science-ish. There is a process to looking inwards and finding the true things there, and you can't really explain why it's true, but when you put it out on the paper, it seems true. And I think, for instance, the scientific in the idea process of science and of making an archaeological theory, there is this room for this truth that comes inwardly, but you have to then go and make sure that it's actually true, and you have to use language that sort of justifies the degree of certainty, and I don't have to do that ever. But I wanted to come back to the death idea, the death topic, because you said that the industrial age is probably the biggest shift in death practices, in burial practices. But I think there must have been some really big shifts from hunter-gatherer societies to agricultural, and then from agricultural to urban. Do we see different burial practices in urban medieval cities and the urban or the rural farming places?
Okay.
Can you say something about that?
Actually, what's really interesting, depends on, in general terms, no. And what's really interesting, yes, in terms of density of burial and option for burial, so in a later medieval town or city, you have small, tiny parishes. You probably, if you were a merchant or you were lower gentry, you started to get options of where you could be buried. You started to be able to negotiate whether you're going to go to the monastery on your home manor near where you founded, or or you want the friary in the town which you've patronised, and you start to get into optionality. So yeah, there are differences, but I think because of the overarching Christian structure, there's actually a lot of similarity to the burial practices in towns than in the countryside. So actually, not as much as you'd think, really. But yeah, I agree with you that the beginning of urban life does mark a shift in where and how you're buried. But even that, I think, wouldn't have been that big of a conceptual shift. I mean, so if you're thinking about, say, I don't know, southern Scandinavia or central Scandinavia depending on when Christianity starts to get a foothold, end of the 10th, 11th centuries, yeah, you're going to see changes in being buried in churchyards. There's still a big debate about actually when did it become absolutely common for everyone to be buried in a churchyard. It may have been only in the 12th century, after 150 years or so of Christianity being sloshing around. But when it did happen, yeah, sure, there's a geographical shift, but still the association of burial with the community was reasonably similar. So I don't, I agree with you. There are shifts. So when you go back to when you think about the long shift from hunter-gatherer burials to farming burial, yeah, but I don't think this would have been happening in such a rapid process as industrialization shifts the relationship between the living and the dead. That's my sense, because you're looking at most places, you're not looking at sort of one generation. All right, we're just bludgeoning a few a few deers. Now farming, that's a great idea. Let's just do that. Despite obviously there being some discussions now of a more rapid transfer, we're still dealing with generation upon generation deep and very. So I think there would have been more continuities across those divides. So I don't deal with those early communities.
That does make sense, and also, I mean, one of the ways that archaeologists identify even hunter-gatherer cultures is by common burial rituals over huge areas. So, and those huge areas must have had very different ways of living also, because they were climatically not quite the same. And so it's huge swaths of different people in different tribes and constellations, maybe speaking the same languages, but burying people or dealing with the dead in very similar ways.
Yeah.
So that actually makes sense, that my thought about the urban versus rural, maybe just me projecting modern.
I'm not saying there's no differences, but I think we're projecting back. You're right. We're projecting back, literally 1,000 years of urban life, and saying, oh, this is what we now do in urban context. This looks crazy different from what a traditional farming society would look like. But actually, for those societies undergoing that process, it would have been a difference, but not that big a difference. I suppose one of the big fundamental, going back to your earlier example, sort of thinking about hunter-gatherer to farming, I don't think that would have been the shift. The real shift would have been sedentism. So, like, we know parts of the world,
of course,
where fisher hunter-gatherers don't need to move around, right? So look, the dead, the Sea of Galilee in Palestine. We've got Lake Baikal in Siberia. The American Northwest coast for millennia. Parts of where you don't need to be nomadic. You can stick around, and you can get most of your resources. And when we see early sedentary or near sedentary communities that are still fisher hunter gathering, that's where farming then takes over. But that can take millennia. But those societies, when you start to live somewhere, you start to bury your dead in proximity. That does create that connection of place, ancestors, and the living in a way you don't get if you've got large territories. So it's not. I'm not saying that people who are nomadic have no connection to their dead. They do, but the dead may end up being disposed of in a range of location and a much more complex, spread out geography, rather than more sedentary societies that are, they may travel, they may go off to upland pastures for the summer, and there may be movement, but you've got a home, you've got a place. This is your village, and this is all your, not village is a bit anachronistic, but this is your place, this is your settlement, and that's when you see bigger cemeteries. You see the Natufian in Southwest Asia. They start to have big cemeteries for the first time. So gosh, I don't even know what millennia that is. 9th millennia BC. I forget my
way long ago.
Back in the day, back before.
Back in the day, yeah.
It's a bit early for me, so I get my millennium back then. But
exactly, what is your main area in terms of both geography and time? What is your specialized field?
Okay, so I'm since
dates and the cartographer numbers.
Yeah. So people get confused because the period that I study has more net terminology than anything else, and it's a real nightmare for everyone because you have lots of different period terms of prehistory in different parts of the world. Then you have the ancient world, and then you have the Middle Ages, right? And the Middle Ages you can break down in different ways depending on which country. So I deal with what you guys in Norway would call the later Iron Age, what I would call the early Middle Ages. So I deal with the 5th to 11th centuries AD or CE. So the mid to late first millennium AD or CE. So I soundbite that for popular audiences is early medieval Wales, Anglo-Saxon England, and Viking Age Scandinavia. Those are the areas I've worked on at different times. So I've done field work in Sweden, excavating a Viking period boat grave. I've done excavations, multiple early medieval burial sites in the UK, in England, and I've worked on early medieval Wales as well. And I don't do field work at the moment in terms of excavations, but I do a lot of desk-based work and analytical work, and I've gone more into heritage and public archaeology, as well as studying what actually happened in those periods. I've been spending a lot of time talking about how we best communicate that, how do we improve the ways we talk about the field, and that's partly what I'm on TikTok for, is to try and both contribute to the discussions and public education, but also to have conversations about what we get right, what we get wrong, what's the misinformation we're accidentally sharing or deliberately sharing, or we're trying to counter misinformation from elsewhere. So but in short, I study Anglo-Saxons, Vikings, early medieval Welsh people.
One of the most influential archaeologist on how I think about archaeology is a Danish archaeologist called Christian Christiansson.
Christian Christiansson, yes, he's a good jazz pianist as well.
And I understand like 50% of the words in an archaeology book, but I pretend I understand the rest, and it seems good. But one of his forewords, or maybe it was in an article I think it was in a foreword, he talks how after, like before the Second World War, there was this huge job for historians and archaeologists of telling the grand narratives of why my country is the greatest country. And then after the events of World War II, this becomes obviously taboo. That this serious academics couldn't do that anymore, and that's we still learned about those types of grand narratives in grammar school, but in academia you couldn't do it. And then archaeology became obsessed with sort of gathering items and logging them very carefully, and then never putting them in context again. And if there was a context, it was a very small local context.
Yeah.
And what he argued for there was the need for newer, more accurate grand narratives.
I mean, yeah,
That,
Christian has been long-term advocate of big, grand stories of the European Bronze Age and has been heavily criticised for it. But he is right in that broader point. And I was just watching a YouTube discussion of the aftermath of the Flint Dibble Graham Hancock debate by Archaeodeath with Professor Karen Cooney, who's an Egyptologist, and they were making the same point: is that, and this is not a new point, but we have to keep saying it, is that archaeologists have been so terrified of that big story, we let grifters tell that big story. We let the we let that story be told because we are scared to tell that story. And I think that's certainly true of German-speaking archaeology, but it's been less so for Anglo-American archaeology. But we have still been nervous about great simplifications and broad brush narratives, and it's still a problem for me. So I told you a while ago, and I'm still working on it, this attempting to write a synthesis myself of Viking archaeology that I know will piss off everybody, especially all the Viking period archaeologists, because every big story you write is selective in what aspects you bring to the fore. And my Viking archaeology is going to be very different from the kind of big story that Neil Price has written, or the biggest new book on the Viking Age is The Age of Wolf and Wind by David Zori, which has just come out. And I've just started going through this, and I agree with 99% of what he says, but equally I'm going, this isn't the way I would say it. This isn't the way I would teach the Viking Age. And my point is, yeah, we do need, as you rightly say, to keep simplifying and writing that big story. But also we need to be aware that if we're going to play that game, we've got to live in the same waters as people who will use it to say some pretty dangerous things. And so we either stay in our ivory towers and just write specialist reports about our brooch types and our latest discovery of a new spindle world, or we write those stories. And it's not just a fight with pseudo archaeologists, it's a fight with historians. Because historians, while I get on with historians are more than happy to use our archaeological data out of context and to tell us what they think it says, and often it doesn't. So we are in not a war, but we're in tension, shall we say, in our writing the grand narrative, the big story of any period, say the Viking Age, the Viking world, with popular historians, political scientists, as we've seen on TikTok, who do YouTube videos talking about how the Vikings caused the Crusades. There's a germ of something there, but the way it's presented is so far off from what I would consider is a meaningful causation route. But my point is, we either get our hands dirty and play in those games, or we just go, oh no, that's all beneath me. I'll stay writing my very specialist research. And I think that's the challenge I face. I don't have it right yet. I'm still struggling with that. In the same way that, it's very easy. It's safer to retreat to one's own little area and go, well, I'm only interested in burials of the late 6th and early 7th century in East Anglia or whatever it may be. And I won't talk on social media, or I won't. And it was a challenge for me recently when we had, it's nothing to do with the Vikings. It's to do with the ongoing debate about the use of the term Anglo-Saxon, and the British right-wing press went absolutely ballistic when a major journal changed its name. And this has been a debate that's been ongoing for decades, actually, but particularly heated in the last 6 years about the term Anglo-Saxon, and particularly its American racialized uses in popular culture, which go back to the 18th century. And I was asked by the British broadsheet, The Telegraph, a journalist from The Telegraph, can you give a comment? And I have previously just ignored Telegraph journalists, but I thought, well, why not? Why not give a quote? And so the question, why not, is because you end up being associated and quoted in politically, in a venue I wouldn't wipe my backside on, but equally when the article came out, the only, in my mind, and I used this, the only rational or logical argument in that entire article was a quote from me, and the rest of it was just angry old white guy online or historian, shouting at it. So the problem is, you can say, well, therefore I get dirty, I get associated with that venue and those other voices, but at least I presented a perspective that people might not otherwise have got if they just gone to the same predictable, politically orientated, outraged, anti-woke, whatever you call them, the same people who comment on everything. So, and it's a dilemma. I'm not saying I was right to or wrong to, but I don't. It's a challenge for all of us, and they never ask about my actual research. That the press are never interested in the things that I think are really cool. They're only interested in the controversial things. They can set me up as weird academic, says this, but I don't know. It's a difficult one, isn't it? And we're having this debate about whether Flint Dibble should have gone on the Joe Rogan show, and I've been very critical of it, but I never said he shouldn't have. My view is that I don't think he represents us all. If he wants to do that, it's up to him. But and it's never been done before. But equally, I wouldn't have gone on it, but for a host of reasons. But yeah,
I think that in a lot of these cases, you can't actually know whether you should or should not until you've done it.
Yeah.
And the risk reward scenario might be like you say, okay, there's a 20% chance I will get a good point across and an 80% chance they will just butcher it. But that 20% chance is so important that I hope even the Telegraph can get a quote right.
Yeah, I mean, there was a case 3 years ago where an amateur archaeology supporter, not an archaeologist, was invited onto GB News, the sort of right-wing Tory and right of Tory news site, to talk about archaeology with Neil Oliver, the former archaeologist, now anti-vaxxing, barking chap who is a presenter on GB News. And he went on there to simply talk about the value of an archaeology degree and the value of archaeology as a subject area. And the interview he did with Neil Oliver, I honestly thought was excellent. And Neil Oliver behaved himself. Yes, you see on GB News, Neil Oliver doing these rants to camera about all manner of subjects. But if you actually watch that clip, it was a perfectly okay. And Neil Oliver's take is, he hates the archaeological community now because they criticise him all the time. But he actually behaved himself to talk to this guy on. He knew he wasn't an archaeologist himself, but he was campaigning to support us in universities where we were facing closures of departments, and the interview was actually fine. But the archaeological community in the UK went absolutely crazy at this guy and the social media storm because he went on GB News. Now, if I'd gone on GB News, I would have expected serious pushback from my archaeology colleagues on the principle of appearing, and then regardless of what I said, and I would say I would really not be sure whether I would go on GB News at all on principle, given the quality and the low quality and the rhetoric of their content. But he was not an archaeologist. He was talking about the value of archaeology, and I was really shocked to see my archaeology colleagues saying, really losing their rag over. It's the equivalent of, if you're going on that show to talking about vaccines to combat an anti-vaxxer, you're doing some good in appearing in that venue simply by showing there are people that believe that vaccines work. So you can see it both sides. I'm not saying he should have or shouldn't have, but I was really angry at my colleagues because not that they had to approve of him going on, but because they were so eager to denounce him for trying to communicate to a group of people whose, most of them minds are made up, but actually there's a lot of interest in archaeology across the cultural and political spectrum. And if you can give them a little bit of an introduction, to why people are studying archaeology, and why it's an important discipline. And that was the funny thing about the Graham Hancock Flint Dibble debate, that even Graham Hancock at the end of that 4.5 hour slog podcast admits that he thinks archaeologists are really important and should be supported, because he uses their data to make up crazy crap. But at least he understood that discipline exists and should continue to exist. He's not arguing that we should just not be funded anymore because they don't agree with his crazy ideas about ancient societies. So what really frustrated me about archaeologists is we are as a discipline, we are very fragile, we are very sensitive, and sometimes we do have to put our neck above the parapet. Sometimes we do have to get our hands dirty talking to groups that we wouldn't necessarily share a political allegiance with, or feel comfortable with. And all I can tell you, Kim, in every local society talk I've ever given, you look around the room, and I'm talking about Anglo-Saxon burials, and there's neo-pagans there, there's working class people there, there's retired people there, and there will be one or two tight. I don't know what words I can say on TikTok lives, but there will be people who certainly have views that are shared by certain people from the mid 20th century who had very distinctive moustaches, and that's the challenge of every group of people you talk to, from a village hall up to a TV appearance. You'll be touching on that spectrum, and it's really difficult, isn't it? Because you don't want to be seen to be advocating or indulging those groups, and yet equally they'll be there in some way. Sorry, I'm ranting on now but it does frustrate me, because I never know what to do with these things, and I'm not going to get many invites because I'm not exactly the hottest celebrity archaeologist. But I think it's important I think through this in case I do get asked again. But yeah, to my shame, I'm quoted in the Telegraph.
But that's good, because I mean, there is, for instance, a difference between writing academic articles and writing popular books, and you need both of them, and there is also a need for people who can go into these crazy spaces, and actually try to make sense of it, and also try to make sense of the humanity of it. And probably most of those people who go into the like the ancient aliens conspiracy spaces shouldn't be archaeologists. But some have to be. Some have to be, and there has to be some who are willing to take the hit in prestige you get from talking to these people as if they're human, because they are human.
I remember years ago I was invited to a metal detecting society to give a talk, and metal detectorists, it's legal in the UK, it's rife. As long as you have landowners' permission and it's not a scheduled monument, you can metal detect. And many archaeologists have very strong opinions about metal detecting. It can reveal some amazing finds, and amateur metal detecting is a hobby that has many passionate adherents. It's a way we can do public engagement. But equally, not only are you dealing with metal detectorists that are, should we say, some of them are looting and sites, but also that some of them are, again, it's a gross generalisation, but you go to a metal detecting club, and let's just say the political, cultural, it's a different kind of, much more working class, many people that would be very different, political backgrounds, and you're in a different type of territory to a local archaeology or history society, right? So they said, I want you to come and talk about burials, right? So what can I do? What can I talk to a metal detecting club about burials that doesn't promote or encourage them to metal detect graves? So I said, I said, here's the really cool things you can find out about burials and the dead and the importance of learning about the dead. And I only used graves which didn't contain any metal finds. So I showed, look at all these cool things. And after every little case study I did, said, and a metal detectorist wouldn't find any of this, and to make the point to them that context matters, that the bones, the antler, the leather, the whatever it may be. I literally went through and made every burial either pre-Metal Ages, so Stone Age graves, or I used graves as examples where there's amazing evidence of a coffin surviving, but there was no metal artifacts at all, to make the point to them that archaeology isn't simply your little finds that you're ripping out of the plough soil. Graves are the story of people's lives, the honouring of the dead person, the loved one, and their treatment. And I really laid it on thick because I thought, here's an opportunity for me to talk to an audience who love the past, love history, but are very narrow in their focus. They only care about things. And so I thought this was a way of getting into the story. And they didn't invite me back, but equally they didn't throw me out. So I think that's a win, isn't it?
That's a win. It sounds like a win. I wanted to go to. We were on the topic of politics briefly. And there's a video going around with Hillary Clinton talking about people on TikTok don't know history. And I've been thinking a lot about that quote because I think that in her world she is probably right. Because she knows what Yasser Arafat said there, and she knows what Bill Clinton felt then, and she knows these big people. But on TikTok, you have you have the conspiracy historians, you have the Rome bros who count all the armies and all of that stuff, but you also have, for the first time, in language that's available for the public, you have people doing nuanced history about, not just about the big men and the big women, but about how history unfolds using archaeology, using social sciences, using all sorts of different evidence, and telling these stories that aren't about, and then Stalin did this, so Churchill had to do this and Hitler had to do that, but that are actually about the things we more nuanced things. And I think that type of history and academia in itself is a threat to authoritarian figures, whether they be Clinton or Trump or Keir Starmer or Rishi Sunak. When you stop talking about the big chieftains and start talking about what can we actually learn from this grave find, that's not just the coins, not just the blades.
Exactly. I'm really, I'm really outclassed by most of the history and archaeology creators on here, who are much more effective, and the psychon people who sort of jump between disciplines but use archaeology much more effectively than perhaps I feel. Absolutely, I've learned so much about my own discipline, let alone history and ancient history and geography and sociology. I've learned so much on TikTok that myself, so I'm a student too. I'm here learning from other people about theology, about religious studies, about biblical studies. There's so much I'm learning about art, and all I can say is that it's very humbling, and places like TikTok are a threat to academics as well. I think many do feel very threatened by both, the democratization of the fact that you can do a video about Norse mythology, and more than, if I did a video about Norse mythology, no one would watch it, but if Kim does a video about Norse mythology, people will sit up and listen. And I'm really, I suppose my role on this is I think my content isn't really doing a good job in many ways, because what I'm trying to do is talk about people talking about the topic, which is a bit more dull. It's not as, I do some discovery videos. Hey, did you know they've just discovered this and this means this? But whenever I do that, I try to go beyond the reportage to sort of say, however, I don't believe this evidence, or here, but however, I think this is not as convincing as something else, because I don't want to just do good news archaeology reporting, or I want to give people something genuine that is, links to my interests rather than just. And I don't want to. Some people have just got to realise, this is an introduction. If you want to learn more, go read the article. So there's no point in doing Some people do lots of follow-up videos, and so when I did a report recently of the new publication about a young woman found in a storage pit in a Iron Age Dorset settlement, and this could be a sacrifice. And
I saw the Jolly News video. I was wondering what the hell has Howard been eating, but it made sense in the end.
I know it did misfire a bit, but my point is I wanted to use it as an opportunity to try and report the information, but also try and sort of parody a bit some of the ways we perhaps as a community insensitively talk about really quite harrowing evidence as if it's all fun and joy. I'm not saying other TikTok creators are bad at this. I'm just saying we all fall into that trap of going, hey,
society is bad at it.
Sorry?
Society is bad at it. It's
Look, all these people died in a horrific way. Yay! I don't know. I know that some people, I get things wrong in my pitch sometimes, but I think it is important. Going back to your point about Hillary Clinton, is I think the entitlement and the lack of understanding of how powerful and important these venues are. Yes, they're flawed. Yes, they're pseudo archaeology, but you can find my content. I've got a foot in the door here. People can find it. If they want to go through my video, through my playlist, they can find some perspectives. And Kim, the one area I'm really proud of that is working in that regard is the face paint and chin line and face tattooing argument, because that's not something we can ever really be conclusive about. We can, and even if we did find some miraculously preserved mummified Viking body and it had chin lines, that would be ridiculously unlikely. But if it happened, that would still only be one Viking. So but it's really important as a way, because my video playlist is being cited by native Alaskan, native Greenlander creators, and people are saying, well, here's a creator who's done some videos. You can go through and understand the issues and the archaeological evidence. And surely that is doesn't matter how many people get to see that playlist, that is a job done, because somewhere on this app, people are referencing that set of videos. And I don't think all the videos are perfect. And I wish I'm not going to start redoing videos just because I didn't like the way I said a particular thing, or the auto caption got a word wrong. But it's enough to give people an introduction that they then can go and read stuff. And I think that's where I feel it's effective, because it's not. Yeah, I'll never be able to compete with the big, the political grifters and the pseudo archaeology hacks. But at least I can say, look, here are some videos. If you don't want to read a book, here's the starting point. And I think that's a job done, isn't it?
Absolutely. And I think now without praising TikTok unnecessarily, because it is a Chinese spying app that is selling personal information to advertisers, just like YouTube is a American spying app that is selling, and Meta it's all the same. It's just here we have to praise the mother party and Winnie the Pooh. Okay, now now the live gets taken off. But I think that one of the fascinating things with TikTok is because it's so much based on the communication directly from one video to another, instead of in the commentary field like on Facebook and YouTube. It creates these synergies where you can have smaller academic creators making a lot of knowledge available, and then you can have other academic creators who are better at the more the storytelling bit, who can take that information and disseminate it and make it broader, more broadly available. And then you have buggers like me who can just steal and draw a fancy thing and not even give the sources, but who still owes a lot to so many new perspectives, both academic perspectives and political perspectives, and also personal perspectives that I wouldn't have understood. Because 10 years ago, if you asked me about Viking chin lines, I would have been, yeah, that doesn't matter. But then
Same
we
here.
learned.
I mean, literally, never even thought there would be a problem or an issue 10 years ago. I mean, even when I started watching the TV show Vikings and seeing it, I went, oh yeah, I see what they're doing there, but I didn't think I would have to talk about it like ad nauseum through 30 videos, or some of these other repeated cliches about the Viking Age or the Anglo-Saxons. Like, and some of them I'm being selective about how I correct. Like, so people are constantly obsessed with cleanliness. Oh, the Vikings are all disgusting and dirty because Ibn Fadlan said so. The Vikings were so clean, as John of Wallingford said, that all women wanted to sleep with Vikings. No, this is all nonsense. It's all nonsense in different ways. Of course people were filthy, but of course people were groomed. There weren't whole groups of people who didn't wash, and likewise there weren't whole groups of people that by our grooming standards we would actually want to be anywhere near, let alone sleep with. But it's our modern fantasies, and the problem is early medieval people simultaneously fulfill these stereotypes all over the place. And so I suppose a victory, a good day, is when you can get people to think about it, rather than, not necessarily that we know all the answers, but get people thinking about, well, maybe we don't know exactly what their hair looked like, but now I'm thinking about what their ships did, and we have evidence for that. And if I can steer people to where we do have evidence, away from the fixation with, skin tone and hair and how often they wash their noses out or whatever, then I think we're getting somewhere. If I can say, well, we don't know exactly, how many Vikings wore beards in this way, but we certainly know what their houses look like, or we certainly know what their, that they had all these parasites in their intestines because we found them in all the coprolites, or, we can get into the past. And I think that's good, because we have to make sure that people understand that the past was pretty horrible, but also that it wasn't all bad. People still laughed and got drunk and had fun, and it wasn't just 100% wall-to-wall pillaging and dying of plague. Things happened between plagues and pillaging, it wasn't all miserable.
I think if now one of the sort of popular grand narratives on both the more politically capitalistically liberal side and a bit towards the right is the Steven Pinker better angels of our nature, that everything has gotten better, and that the past was this dystopia of just murder and violence. And sure, there were murders and violence there, but most people, most of history, didn't experience war.
No.
They might experience armies going past their town, but most didn't. And the peaceful and the cooperative phases of humanity outweigh the wars and the murders by a lot. Otherwise, we wouldn't be 8 billion people.
I
And
mean,
we
even
would.
even the stereotypes of like Icelandic feud sagas and the feuds, they're remembering really exceptional events that happened across generations, centuries later. That it's like most families have a story that they tell about. Do you remember Uncle whatever and what he did one time in the war? And that's it. There's nothing. Yeah, most people were just living their lives and getting away without having to do anything particularly outrageous or exciting. And the past was boring. That's the thing. In many ways, I'm not always boring, but the past is really cool and exciting. We can learn so much about it. But equally, we have to balance
Life has always been this boring. That's the most people have not lived in interesting times. There's this cliche about the ancient Chinese curse, may you live in interesting times, which is something you can only say if you have lived through boring times.
Exactly. And I think we're always doing this dance as archaeologists and historians between, sensationalizing and, there's different ways of telling, educating about things that are really boring, making them interesting, but not everything has to be interesting in the same way. And I think this is the thing that I really like about social media apps like this is I'm having to respond to questions I didn't think were things. Never in my, I could have guessed some of it, but some of it is just like, never did I think I would do a video as I did last week, having to say, no, the Vikings weren't incels. Like it's the concept. I'm not an expert on what an incel is. I understand the broad concept. There's obviously a whole sociological, psychological debate about incel culture. But, having to respond to another academic, who is online doing a soundbite, oh, the Vikings are incels. And
that sounds like something I could say.
Yeah, but it's fine. It's fine as long as it's a window, a way into a conversation. And in terms of the other academics' discipline, I kind of got what he meant, and for his purposes, it did a job of just making a quick analogy that at different times and different places, young men are violent individually and collectively, and therefore we need to think about this, and that's enough. So I of course my criticism is a staged performance of overreaction, of countering it, but it helps an audience think about my period, think about the issues, and in that sense it's controversy, but it's good controversy because it gets people thinking, and I think that should be a healthy thing, and I hope more people do videos going, Howard says this, he's wrong, however, because of this, because hopefully it builds that debate. As long as it's not just slanging matches and, and I don't like his face. Well, that's fine. No one does. But the point is, it's about how do we get people engaged in these stories about the human past. And if it's a bit of argument, that's fine,
Now, I think we've come to the point where you have to decide whether you like your face or not, because this is as good as it will get, and we're a little over time already, and it won't get better than this on
I think that's what
this live
face for a long time. It's only getting worse.
That's the drawing, I mean, not your face. So let's see if I've managed to capture your beauty.
This is a unique
in some way,
and it's happened to me.
And I apologize if not. And
oh my word! It is me. I see it. Wow!
Fantastic.
It's like I like that. I like that. I'm like a blue Odin. I like that.
Yeah, I took the other eye away at the last second because I thought Odin will have to do for today. Getting two eyes to line up is difficult in an hour.
Oh wow! Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was extremely fun. I have to say that now, whenever I do a project, I always have a multitude of reasons. So, for instance, now that I've started drawing my mutuals and also some of my followers, one of the reasons is to get connected with people. One of the reasons is to build something that I hopefully can do some business on, maybe do a podcast later, though, and I would love to have you on.
Oh,
And one of the reasons is that I want to get better at drawing portraits, and there's this show that was first on BBC or on British television as a Portrait Artist of the Year, and now they have a Portrait Artist of the Year season 2 in Norway as well. So I hope to get into there, but all of these reasons aside, probably just emotionally, mentally, the biggest reason why I started this and asked for mutuals to talk to and to draw is then I could probably find archaeologists and ask them questions. So you are the first to fulfill my archaeology fanboy dreams, and this was fantastic.
On all levels, thank you so much. That's just it's been really fun, and I hope it's I see a few people that are mutuals or followers of both of us, but I hope this brought new people to as an event as well. I hope it's brought new people to be aware of what we're doing as well, equally.
I see Lilla Flicka is in my chat and excited to see this, and I would love to talk to her on a live someday soon. And here's a last look at how the...
Looks nothing like me.
No.
Hey, there you are there. That's the way I feel most time.
I had so much fun with this, and I feel like we didn't even scratch the surface. Archaeology-wise, we didn't dig down even to the 70s. So next time we will dig a little deeper, and I would love to do that again.
Absolutely, but it's been lovely, and have a good evening, and just let me know if you want to do any other chats at any point with a podcast or otherwise. It's always good. Anytime.
But yeah, I will try to set up podcast where I probably do something like this. But with archaeologists, we could also have like these theme episodes of a podcast where we talk about something specific, and I try to draw that at the same time and put it out for free use.
There'd be so much potential for that. Yeah. Oh, I can think of some things we could do. Yeah. Even within sort of early medieval archaeology, there's artifacts, places, landscapes, mythology, so much. Yeah. Oh, we should scheme about that. That would be really cool.
Yeah. That would be amazing. And thank you so much for doing it. It's been a privilege, and I'll talk to you soon.
Take care, mate.
Bye-bye.
Bye now. Thank you, everyone. Take care.
Sadly, we're all going to die. But while you're waiting, why not follow Archaeodeath? Subscribe now on YouTube.